Out here in the raw, baked dirt of the American West, you learn one thing fast. The most dangerous predator isn't the coyote, it isn't the rattler, and it sure as hell isn't the lone Apache warrior the old folks whisper about. No, the most dangerous thing in this land is a secret. And in the dusty, forgotten town of Bitter Creek, a young woman named Clara Morgan was about to become the keeper of a secret so heavy it would either crush her or set her free. The year was 1875. The sun bled across the horizon like a fresh wound, painting the whole world in shades of rust and blood. Clara stood at the window of her father's inn, a place that was less a haven and more a cage built of splintered wood and broken dreams. At 20, she was beautiful in a way that didn't belong here. She had eyes that held more hope than the desert held stars, and hands that, while rough from work, moved with a memory of a gentler life back east. A life before her family chased a phantom fortune into this God-forsaken emptiness. That gentle memory was about to be shattered. "Clara, stop your daydreaming and get to the creek." Her mother's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and frayed, like old rope. "Guests are coming on the evening stage." Clara sighed. It was always something. Water for the kitchen, water for the horses, water for cleaning the dust that was the town's only true crop. She hefted the heavy wooden yoke onto her shoulders, the two buckets swinging at her sides like a ball and chain, and stepped out into the dying light. The walk to the creek was a path she knew by heart. She knew every rock, every thorny bush, every place a snake might be hiding. But today something was different. The air was too still. The evening birds were silent. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm or before a gunshot. She knelt at her usual spot, a small platform of flat rocks by the shallow, clear water. She dipped the first bucket, the cold shocking her skin, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. As she reached for the second, she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, the soft nicker of a horse close, hidden in the thick willows just downstream. Her blood ran cold. Travelers used the main road. Locals knew this path, but they had no reason to be here. Hidden. The first thought that screamed through her mind was Indians, but that wasn't right. This sound was clumsy, less like a shadow, more like something trying not to be seen. Slowly, Clara rose to her feet. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt her father had given her. It was meant for cutting twine, not for defense, but it was all she had. Through a gap in the willows, she saw him. He was kneeling at the water's edge, his hat beside him on the ground. A man. A stranger. He cupped water in his hands, splashing it on a face that looked like it was carved from the desert itself. When he looked up, water dripping from a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Their eyes met, and the world stopped. He was older than her, maybe 30, maybe more. It was hard to tell with men who lived their lives under the glare of an unforgiving sun. His face was a roadmap of a hard life. A jagged scar sliced through his left eyebrow. Another traced the line of his jaw. His skin was weathered leather, but it was his eyes that stole the breath from her lungs. They were gray. Not the soft gray of a morning dove, but the hard, turbulent gray of a winter storm gathering over the mountains. They held so much sorrow, so much weariness, that her heart ached with a sympathy she couldn't explain. He didn't move. She didn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to scream for help. A good woman, a proper woman, did not find herself alone by the creek with a strange man who looked like he'd wrestled with devils and maybe won, but just barely. Yet she was rooted to the spot, held captive by the stillness in him. He made no move for his horse, no move for the well-worn Colt, 45, that sat low on his hip. "I mean no harm, miss." His voice finally broke the silence. It was low, rough, like gravel rolling downhill. "Just watering my horse." Clara found her own voice, but it was a pale imitation of its usual strength. "This is private land. The town's back that way." She gestured behind her, annoyed at the tremor in her hand. "I know," he said, rising slowly. Every movement was careful, deliberate, like he was approaching a spooked animal. "Figured to avoid the town. Some places, they don't take kindly to strangers." "Most strangers use the road," she countered, a bit of her fire returning. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it never reached his storm gray eyes. Most strangers ain't got nothing to hide. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. It should have terrified her. Instead, a strange, reckless curiosity bloomed in her chest. She took in the details. His gun belt, though worn, was oiled and cared for. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but they were clean. This was no common drifter. There was a discipline in the way he stood, a straightness in his spine that spoke of training, of war. The country was full of men like him, men broken and set adrift by the war between the states, forever searching for a peace they would never find. You running from the law? The question was out before she could stop it. This time the smile was real, if only for a second. It changed his entire face, hinting at a man who might have existed before the scars and the sorrow. No, miss. The law and I, we got no quarrel. I'm just running from other things. Clara understood that more than he could ever know. Wasn't she running too? In her own quiet way? Running from the suffocating future her parents had planned for her? Running from the persistent, clammy courtship of Jacob Miller, the richest rancher in the county. Running from a life that felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. Clara! Her mother's voice, faint on the wind, shattered the spell. Clara, where are you? She grabbed her buckets, water sloshing over the rims as she scrambled to leave. I have to go. Wait. He took a half step forward, then stopped himself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you. You didn't, Clara said, and was shocked to realize it was the absolute truth. But you should move on. This town, they don't trust strangers, especially ones who avoid the main road. He nodded, a deep understanding in those eyes. He knew what kind of town this was. I'll be gone before moonrise. She shouldered the yoke, the weight of the water a familiar burden. But as she turned to leave, some impulse made her stop. There's a cavalry camp 2 days north of here, she heard herself say. They sometimes hire scouts, men who know the territory, if you're looking for work. Why was she helping him? Why was she trying to keep him here, in this place she so desperately wanted to escape? She couldn't say. She only knew that the loneliness in his eyes called out to the loneliness in her own heart. Obliged, he said, the single word carrying a world of meaning. Clara hurried back up the path, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the top of the rise, she risked a look back. He was still there, a lone, dark figure against the bruised purple sky, watching her go. That night, the stranger was gone, just as he'd promised. But he wasn't gone from her mind. As she served stew to dusty travelers and endured her father's booming pronouncements about her engagement to Jacob Miller, a fine match, Clara, couldn't do better. Her thoughts were miles away, back at the creek, with a man who had storm-gray eyes and a past he was running from. She didn't even know his name, but she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her very soul, that in that one brief encounter, something inside her had shifted forever. A door had been unlocked, and she had a terrifying feeling that she would never be able to close it again. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. On the surface, nothing had changed. Clara rose before dawn, baked biscuits, served meals, mended linens. She was the perfect, dutiful daughter. But inside, she was a storm of rebellion. Every time she looked out a window, she saw his eyes. Every time the wind howled, she heard his voice. He had become a ghost that haunted her waking moments, a silent rebellion against the life being forced upon her. You're wool gathering again, her mother snapped one morning, her voice sharp enough to curdle milk. Your head's been in the clouds all week. Before Clara could apologize, her mother delivered the next blow. Jacob Miller is coming to dinner on Sunday. Your father invited him. You'll wear your blue dress. The words were not a suggestion, they were a command. Mama, I've told you, Clara pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. I don't feel that way about Jacob. Her mother laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Feel? What has feeling got to do with it? He owns the biggest ranch in 3 counties. He can give you a fine house, servants. You'll never want for anything. Except love, Clara thought. except the freedom to choose. The words were so loud in her head, she was terrified she'd said them aloud. But she hadn't. She never did. She just nodded and went back to washing the dishes, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Then on a hot, dusty afternoon, everything changed. A lone rider appeared at the end of Main Street. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. It wasn't his horse, a dusty bay. This was a tall, proud black gelding, and the man in the saddle sat straighter, more military. But as he drew closer, she recognized the set of his shoulders. Her breath caught. It was him, the stranger from the creek. But he was different. He was clean-shaven now, revealing the sharp lines of his jaw and the full extent of the scars. He wore newer clothes, a crisp gray shirt and dark trousers, and a proper hat that shaded his face. He looked less like a man on the run and more like a man on a mission. He dismounted right in front of the inn. Clara's hands flew to her apron, smoothing it, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The bell above the door chimed, and there he was, standing in the doorway, filling it. He took off his hat, revealing dark hair, threaded with silver, and his eyes, those impossible storm-gray eyes, found hers across the empty dining room. The world stopped spinning all over again. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice just as she remembered it, low and rough and real. "I'm looking to rent a room. For a few days, maybe a week." Her mind was screaming, "No, go! If you stay, you'll ruin me. If you stay, you'll give me a hope I can't afford to have." But her mouth said, "Of course, that'll be $2 a night, includes breakfast and supper." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and laid the bills on the counter. His hands were clean now, but still scarred and calloused. She could feel the heat of his presence from across the desk. It was like standing too close to a fire. "Samuel Kane," he said, picking up the pen to sign the register. Samuel. The name fit him. It was strong, solid, old. "You found work then?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "At the cavalry camp?" His eyes sharpened, a flicker of surprise in their depths. "You remembered." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Well, you seemed like you might need the suggestion." "Scout work," he confirmed, setting down the pen. "Temporary. They're surveying new routes through Apache territory. It was dangerous work, the kind of work that got men killed." The thought sent a jolt of fear through her that was entirely unwelcome and entirely undeniable. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Where did you learn to read the land like a book? What battles put those scars on your face and that sorrow in your eyes? What ghosts are you running from, Samuel Kane? Instead, she just handed him a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs." Their fingers brushed as he took the key. It was the briefest of touches, but it felt like a lightning strike. A current of heat shot up her arm, straight to her heart. "Thank you, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice formal, but his eyes were saying something else entirely, something that made her feel seen for the first time in her life. He headed for the stairs, and Clara watched him go, her world tilting on its axis. But the moment was shattered by her father's voice booming behind her. "New guest?" Thomas Morgan was a big man, red-faced and loud, a man who saw his daughter as little more than a bargaining chip. He studied the name in the register. "Kane, don't know the name. You stay clear of him, girl," he warned, his voice low and menacing. "Drifters are trouble, even ones working for the army. And we got your reputation to think of. Jacob Miller won't marry damaged goods." The words were a slap in the face, crude and possessive. She was property, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. And in that moment, looking at her father's hard face, then up the stairs where Samuel Kane had disappeared, Clara knew something had to break. Either her spirit or the cage she was living in. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which one it would be. The week that followed was a slow, agonizing torture. Samuel Kane was the perfect guest. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. He'd leave before dawn and return at dusk, covered in the dust of the territory he was mapping. He ate his supper in a corner of the dining room, speaking only when spoken to. But his presence filled every corner of the inn. Clara felt his eyes on her as she moved through the room, a silent, watchful gaze that set her skin on fire. Their interactions were a dance of formal restraint. "More coffee, Mr. Kane?" Thank you, Miss Morgan. But beneath the surface, a silent conversation was taking place, a current of unspoken understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. The town noticed, of course. Bitter Creek was a place where secrets went to die of loneliness. Whispers followed Clara like her own shadow. "Who's the new fellow?" a merchant asked her. "Looks like a hard case. Got them killer's eyes." The words made her hand tremble, spilling coffee on the table. She knew what they saw: a dangerous man, a drifter, a threat. But she saw something else. She saw a soldier's weariness, a man who had seen too much death and wanted no part of it anymore. Then came Friday, and with it, Jacob Miller. He arrived precisely at 6, smelling of bay rum and self-satisfaction. He was handsome, in a way that left Clara cold, a predator's handsomeness, all sharp teeth and empty eyes. He presented her with a bouquet of flowers, his touch lingering on her waist a second too long, his smile a possessive claim for the whole room to see. The dinner was an ordeal. Jacob talked endlessly about himself, his ranch, his money, and the grand house he was planning to build for her. 4 bedrooms, Clara, think of it, with real glass windows shipped all the way from St. Louis. He spoke as if her consent was a mere formality, and all the while Clara could feel Samuel's gaze from across the room. It wasn't angry or jealous. It was assessing, and maybe, just maybe, pained. When she cleared Samuel's plate, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The connection was so intense, it was like a physical blow. She saw a flicker of something in those gray depths, a warning before he looked away, his face an unreadable mask once more. After dinner, Jacob commanded her to take a walk. It was not a request. Outside, under a sky full of indifferent stars, he got straight to the point. "Your father says you've been distracted lately." "I've been tired," she lied. "That'll change when we're married," he said, his tone making it clear that her feelings were irrelevant. "My wife won't be serving strangers." He was offering her a different cage, one with gilded bars, but a cage nonetheless. "I'm thinking October for the wedding." "Jacob, I haven't said yes." His handsome face hardened, the charming mask slipping away. "Your father has, and that's what matters." He saw the look on her face and tried a different tactic, his voice dripping with condescension. "Clara, be reasonable. I'm offering you everything: security, position. What more could you possibly want?" "Love," her heart screamed. "I want a man who sees me, not a prize to be won." "I need time," she managed to say. His grip on her arm tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Time for what? To wait for a better offer?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "There won't be any. You're pretty enough, but you've got no dowry. I'm your best chance, Clara. Your only chance." The cruelty was breathtaking, and the worst part was, he was right. In this world, for a woman like her, he was the only sensible choice. But her heart wasn't sensible. Her heart was reckless. Her heart was beating for a man with storm-gray eyes and a past full of ghosts. "Take me home, please," she whispered. As they walked back, he delivered his final, crushing blow. "Think hard, Clara. I won't wait forever. And your father? Well, he owes me a considerable sum of money. It'd be a shame if I had to call in those debts." The threat was clear. He didn't just want to marry her. He wanted to own her, and her family along with her. She fled inside, her eyes burning with unshed tears, and nearly collided with Samuel at the bottom of the stairs. He reached out to steady her, his hands strong and gentle on her arms. One sharp glance took in her pale face, her trembling lip, the red marks on her arm where Jacob's fingers had been. "You all right, Miss Morgan?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm fine," she lied automatically. His jaw tightened. "That fellow, he giving you trouble?" The raw concern in his voice was nearly her undoing. She wanted nothing more than to collapse against his solid chest and tell him everything. But she couldn't. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said, pulling away. "Good evening, Mr. Kane." She fled to her room, but sleep was impossible. From her window, she could see him in the courtyard below, smoking a thin cigar, a silvered figure in the moonlight. He wasn't just smoking. He was watching, standing guard, as if his presence alone could keep the darkness at bay. But he couldn't. He would be gone soon, another ghost passing through, and she would be left to face her fate, unless. The thought was a spark in the dry tinder of her soul. Unless she chose differently. Unless she was brave enough to set her own world on fire. Below, Samuel finished his cigar and turned to go inside. But then he paused, and he looked up, straight at her window, as if he knew she was there, as if he could feel her watching him. And in the silent, moonlit distance, their eyes met and held. A promise, a question, a challenge. And Clara knew, with terrifying certainty, that this was no longer a choice between safety and risk. It was a choice between living and dying. By Sunday morning, the town was buzzing. The whispers about the stranger at the inn had grown into a low, steady hum of suspicion. At church, the pastor preached about wolves in sheep's clothing, his eyes finding Clara in the family pew. She felt the weight of every stare, every speculative glance. After the service, Jacob Miller appeared at her side, as if by magic, his smile triumphant. "I've arranged a little something," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "A picnic, out at Willow Springs. Just the two of us." Clara's stomach turned to ice. Willow Springs was 3 miles out of town. It was isolated, private, the perfect place for a man to press his advantages, far from any prying eyes. "I don't think—" "Nonsense," her father boomed, clapping Jacob on the back. "A beautiful day for it. You young people run along and enjoy yourselves." She was trapped. As Jacob led her to the stables, she saw Samuel sitting outside the barber shop, his boots up on the railing, their eyes locked for a single, searing moment. He saw Jacob. He saw the picnic basket. He saw the direction they were headed, and his face, for an instant, was a mask of cold, hard fury, a warning, a silent plea. Then Jacob spurred his horse, and the moment was gone, leaving Clara with nothing but a heart full of dread. The ride to Willow Springs was a nightmare. Jacob prattled on about his plans, his possessions, his importance. Clara barely heard him. Every hoofbeat was taking her further away from safety, deeper into a trap she could see closing around her. The springs themselves were beautiful, an oasis of green in the parched landscape. Jacob spread a blanket, unpacked a lavish lunch, and even produced a bottle of wine. "From my father's private stock," he said proudly. "I don't drink," Clara said, her voice tight. "Today you do," he replied, pressing a glass into her hand. "A toast to our future." The future he was planning for her, the future she would rather die than accept. She took a tiny sip, the wine sour on her tongue. Her silence, her refusal to play along, began to grate on him. His mood darkened. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped, moving closer to her on the blanket. "Any other girl would be grateful." Before she could answer, his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was an assault. Hard, demanding, tasting of wine and rage. She struggled, pushing against his chest, but he was too strong. He gripped her shoulders, his fingers bruising her skin, holding her in place. "Stop!" she cried, wrenching her head away. "You have no right." "I have every right." His handsome face was twisted into an ugly snarl. "Your father promised you to me. You're mine, Clara, whether you like it or not." "I am no one's property," she spat, scrambling away from him. He laughed, the sound full of menace. "Without me, what are you? An innkeeper's daughter, growing old and sour. I'm offering you a kingdom, and you spit in my face. Why? Is it him?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "Is it that drifter? That Kane fellow?" He advanced on her, backing her up against the trunk of a cottonwood tree. "You think I'm blind? I see the way you look at him. Has he touched you? Has he spoiled you for a decent man?" "No!" she cried, the lie and the truth all tangled together. "He's just a guest." "Liar!" The slap was so fast she didn't see it coming. It snapped her head to the side, her cheek exploding in pain. Stars burst behind her eyes. "I've seen him watching you," Jacob hissed, his face inches from hers. "That's why you won't have me. You've given yourself to him, haven't you?" She could taste blood in her mouth. "You're wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Then why?" he demanded, grabbing her arms, shaking her so hard her teeth rattled. "Why won't you accept what any sensible girl would kill for?" The truth, the final, unforgivable truth, tore its way out of her. "Because I don't love you," she screamed, the words echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. "I will never love you, Jacob. You can't own my heart." His face went pale, then a blotchy, furious red. For a long second, she thought he was going to hit her again. But then he stepped back, a cold, calculating look replacing the rage. "Love," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You foolish little girl. You think love matters more than this?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Your father's debt. $800. I call this in. He loses everything. The inn, his pride, everything. Is your foolishness worth that, Clara? Is your love for some worthless drifter worth putting your family out on the street?" The ride back to town was a blur of shame and terror. Her lip was swollen, her cheek was bruised, and her heart was shattered. She knew Jacob would twist the story, paint her as the hysterical one, the ungrateful one. By nightfall, her reputation would be in tatters. They had barely reached Main Street when Samuel stepped out of the hardware store, directly into their path. He took one look at her face, at the swollen lip, the tear tracks, the terror in her eyes, and he stopped dead. A dangerous stillness fell over him. The air crackled. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice deceptively calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Are you hurt?" "She's fine," Jacob snapped, his hand tightening on Clara's arm. "None of your concern, Drifter." Samuel ignored him completely, his storm gray eyes locked on Clara's. "Is that true, miss? Are you all right?" The gentleness in his voice was her undoing. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. "The lady fell from her horse," Jacob said loudly, playing to the crowd that was beginning to gather. "Funny," Samuel said, his voice soft but caring in the sudden quiet. "Funny how a fall from a horse can leave a mark shaped exactly like a man's hand." The crowd murmured. Jacob's face went purple with rage. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying," Samuel replied, taking a slow step forward, his hand hovering near the butt of his Colt, "that you should take your hand off the lady. Now." The threat was unmistakable. The tension was so thick you could taste it. Men were reaching for their guns. Her father was pushing through the crowd, his face a thundercloud. This was going to end in blood, and it would be her fault. "Please," she whispered, the sound small but cutting through the noise. "Both of you, please just stop." Samuel looked at her, and the fury in his eyes softened, replaced by a deep, aching concern. He gave a slight nod and stepped back, but his message to Jacob was clear. This isn't over. That night her father raged. Her mother wept. Jacob had spread his poison, insinuating that Clara had encouraged his advances, that her virtue was questionable, that she had a special friendship with the stranger at the inn. The town, eager for scandal, drank it all in. Clara was no longer the respectable innkeeper's daughter. She was a fallen woman, a fool who had thrown away the chance of a lifetime. From her window she watched Samuel in the courtyard, his lonely vigil a silent testament to his concern. She knew what would happen now. Her father would throw him out. Jacob would run him out of town. This fragile, impossible connection between them would be severed forever. Unless, that word again, that dangerous, beautiful word. Unless she was brave enough to stop waiting for her life to happen and start living it. She touched her swollen lip, not with pain, but with a newfound resolve. Jacob had tried to break her. The town was trying to shame her. Her parents were trying to cage her. But they had all underestimated her. And they had all underestimated the power of a quiet man with storm-gray eyes who had looked at her and seen not property, but a person. And she knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than any fear, that she would rather walk through fire with that man than live in a cold, safe palace with any other. The night was moonless, a thick blanket of velvet pricked with the cold, distant light of stars. For 3 days, Clara had lived in a waking nightmare. 3 days of her father's stony silence, her mother's tearful reproaches, and the town's condemning stares. Her father had given Samuel his notice. He had until the end of the week. Time was slipping through her fingers like fine desert sand. She couldn't let him leave. Not like this. Not without knowing. So she did the one thing she was never supposed to do. She slipped out of the inn just after midnight, a dark shawl pulled over her head, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every creaking floorboard sounded like a gunshot. Every shadow seemed to hold a judge and jury. But she kept going, drawn by an invisible thread, a desperate hope that was more powerful than a lifetime of fear. She found him on the old cemetery road, just where he'd said he sometimes walked when the ghosts of his past wouldn't let him sleep. He was sitting on a fallen log, the faint starlight glinting off the blade of a knife as he whittled a piece of wood. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the surprise on his face, quickly followed by something else, something deep and warm and worried. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. But he was already on his feet, already moving toward her. "I had to come." She pushed back the shawl, letting the starlight fall on her face. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, a permanent reminder of Jacob's cruelty. Samuel's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. "I should have killed him." "No," she said, stepping closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, to smell the scent of dust and leather, and something that was uniquely his. "That would have solved nothing. You'd be hanging from a rope, and I'd still be in my cage." "You're trapped now," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Yes." The word hung between them, a shared and terrible truth. "My father told you to leave." "I know. Got my notice this morning." He studied her face, his gray eyes seeming to see right through to the frantic, desperate core of her. "Is that why you're here? To say goodbye?" She shook her head, a lump forming in her throat. How could she explain it? This frantic need that had driven her out into the darkness, this feeling that if she let him walk out of her life, the best part of her would go with him. He seemed to understand what she couldn't say. "Walk with me," he offered, his voice softer now. They walked down the dusty road side by side, not touching, but so aware of each other it was a physical force. The desert night was alive around them, the call of a distant coyote, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the ache in her own soul. He led her to a cluster of rocks overlooking the valley. Below them, Bitter Creek was a handful of scattered, flickering lights, looking small and fragile under the immense, star-dusted sky. "I see a cage," he said, his voice bitter. "Every building, another bar. Every light, another chain." He told her then about the war, about the farm in Pennsylvania, about the friend who had died in his arms, crying for the girl back home who had already married another man. He spoke of the killing, the burning, the hollowing out of his own soul until there was nothing left but a man who knew how to survive, but had forgotten how to live. "That's why you run," she said, the realization dawning on her. "You're not running from the law. You're running from caring. You're afraid to feel anything again." He turned to look at her, and in the faint light she saw a flicker of stunned respect in his eyes. "Most people don't see that clear. Most people don't look," she countered, her voice steady. "But I do, Samuel Kane. I see you." The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. "Do you see me?" "What I see," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't hide, "scares me more than any battle I ever fought." "Why?" "Because you make me want things I gave up on a long time ago," he confessed, his gaze intense. "You make me think about staying instead of leaving, about building instead of drifting. And that's a dangerous kind of thinking for a man like me." "And for a woman like me," she shot back, her own voice trembling with the force of her feelings. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? I was ready to accept my fate, to marry a man I despise, to live a life that wasn't mine. It was safe, it was sensible. And then you looked at me just once by that creek, and suddenly safe isn't enough anymore." "Clara, don't," he whispered, his voice pleading. "Don't throw your life away for whatever this is." "This?" She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You can't even name it, can you?" She took a breath, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. This was it, the precipice, the point of no return. She could step back into her cage, or she could leap into the terrifying, beautiful unknown. She leaped. Love, she said, the word clear and strong in the night air. I can name it. I love you, Samuel. Maybe it's too fast. Maybe it's foolish. Maybe it's everything I've been warned against my whole life. But when I saw you, something inside me knew. It was like coming home to a place I'd never been before. His breath hitched. She saw his careful control. The wall he had built around his heart begin to crumble. Clara, you don't know what you're saying. I have nothing to offer you. No home, no money, just a horse and a gun and a past full of ghosts. I'm not asking for a home, she said, stepping closer still, her hand finding his in the dark. I'm asking for you. She reached up with her other hand, her fingers gently tracing the scar along his jaw. I see how you watch me when you think I'm not looking. Like I'm water and you've been wandering in the desert for 1,000 years. He turned his hand, his calloused fingers closing around hers, his touch a brand. You are, he whispered, his voice choked. God help me, you are. The admission broke him. The dam of his control shattered, and all the loneliness, all the pain, all the longing he had kept locked away came pouring out. That night by the creek, I was going to ride on, never look back. But I saw you, and it was like the world just stopped. I couldn't leave. I kept telling myself, one more day, just one more glimpse of you. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers through her entire body. Now leaving might kill me, but staying will destroy you. The words hung between them, the terrible, impossible truth. He was right. If he stayed, Jacob and her father would see him dead or run out of town on a rail. If she stayed, she would be forced into a marriage that was a living death. There was only one path left. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only thing that made sense. Then take me with you. The words were a whisper, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. His hand tightened on hers almost painfully. What? When you leave, she repeated, her voice stronger now, her gaze unwavering. Take me with you. I would rather have a life of uncertainty with you than a lifetime of certainty with him. I would rather be an outcast with you than a prisoner in a fine house. I am not afraid of running, Samuel. I am afraid of staying. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes searching hers, looking for any sign of doubt, any hint of hesitation. He found none. He pulled her to him then, his arms wrapping around her, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the world. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt him tremble. I'm not a good man, Clara, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The war, it hollowed me out. I don't know if there's enough of me left to love you the way you deserve. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. Then we will fill the empty spaces together, she said fiercely, with new memories, better ones. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her bruised cheek. You are the bravest person I have ever known. When he kissed her, it was nothing like Jacob's brutal assault. It was a question, a prayer, a promise. It was gentle and searching and desperate and true. It was the taste of freedom. They had 3 days. 3 days until he was forced to leave. 3 days for her to prepare to abandon everything she had ever known, to break her parents' hearts, and to step into a future that was a complete and terrifying mystery. The old mine road, he said, as the first hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky. Where it forks toward Miller's Canyon. Midnight, 3 nights from now. If you're not there, I'll understand. I'll ride on and never trouble you again. I'll be there, she promised. Clara, don't, she said, pressing her fingers to his lips. Don't tell me all the reasons why I shouldn't. Just be there. Then I will spend whatever is left of my life, he said, his voice raw with a love he could no longer deny, trying to be worthy of you. She hurried back to the sleeping town, her heart a wild, soaring thing in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. The next 2 days were a blur of stolen moments and secret plans. They communicated in glances, in a flower left on her windowsill at dawn, in messages tucked into the hollow of an old oak tree behind the stables. They were careful, but the town was watching. And so was Jacob Miller. He hadn't given up. He was like a dog with a bone, his pride wounded, his obsession curdling into something dark and dangerous. On the last afternoon, he made his move. He arrived at the inn with Sheriff Watson in tow, demanding to search Samuel's room. "Got a report of a stolen horse from over at Cedar Ridge," the sheriff said, looking uncomfortable. "Description matches Mr. Kane's mount." It was a lie, a clumsy, transparent attempt to frame him, but Clara's father, still furious, was only too happy to let them search. They tore Samuel's room apart, his few meager belongings tossed aside. Of course, they found nothing. "Satisfied?" Samuel asked, his voice dangerously calm as they finished. Jacob's face was a mask of frustration. "You're hiding something. I can feel it." "The only thing I'm hiding," Samuel said, his eyes finding Clara's across the room, "is my opinion of men who can't take no for an answer." The sheriff, sensing the escalating tension, hustled Jacob out of the inn. But Clara's father turned on Samuel, his face purple with rage. "You have one more day," he snarled. "Dawn the day after tomorrow. You be gone from my town, or I'll have the sheriff escort you out myself." "Understood," Samuel said, his gaze never leaving Clara's. It was a final, silent confirmation. Tonight. It had to be tonight. That evening, Clara moved as if in a dream. She served supper for the last time. She climbed the stairs to her room for the last time. She stood at her window, looking out at the dusty street that had been her entire world, for the last time. On her pillow, she left a note, the words blurred by tears she refused to let fall. "Please don't try to find me. I have chosen love over duty. I have chosen freedom over safety. Please try to forgive me." She eased down the stairs, her small bag clutched in her hand, her heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Out into the night she ran, not looking back, navigating the empty streets by starlight and memory. At the fork in the road, she saw him, a dark silhouette against the darker hills, his horse waiting patiently beside him. Relief washed over her, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. He saw her and moved to meet her, taking her bag in one hand and her hand in the other. "Are you sure, Clara?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "Once we ride out, there's no coming back from this." "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life," she said. He lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She leaned back against his chest, against the solid, steady beat of his heart, and felt a sense of peace she had never known. This was right. This was her home. "Ready?" he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. She placed her hand over his on the reins. "Ready." They rode out into the vast, silent darkness, two small figures against an immense landscape, heading toward an unknown horizon. Behind them, Bitter Creek slept, unaware that the quiet innkeeper's daughter had just rewritten her own story, trading a life of predictable misery for a future of dangerous, beautiful freedom. They were 100 miles from Bitter Creek, but they might as well have been 1,000. The world had shrunk to the space between them, the rhythmic plod of the horse's hooves and the endless, star-strewn sky above. But just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, they heard it, a sound that turned Clara's blood to ice, the distant, unmistakable thunder of hoofbeats, a lot of them. Samuel cursed, his body tensing behind her. "Miller!" he growled. He hadn't just let them go. He was hunting them. The chase was relentless. Jacob and his posse of hired guns were gaining. Samuel pushed their horse, a strong, sturdy gelding, to its limit, weaving through canyons and arroyos, using his knowledge of the land to try and shake their pursuers. But Jacob was driven by a mad, obsessive rage. He wouldn't give up. The sun climbed high in the sky, a merciless, molten eye, baking the very air they breathed. Dust coated their throats, and their water was running low. The sound of the posse grew closer, echoing off the canyon walls. They were trapped. "There!" Samuel shouted, pointing to a narrow crack in the rock face, a side canyon barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "We go on foot from here." He swung down and lifted her from the saddle, grabbing his rifle and a small satchel of supplies. He slapped the horse's rump, sending it galloping off down the main canyon, a decoy to hopefully buy them a few precious minutes. They scrambled into the narrow passage, the rough rock tearing at their clothes and skin. It was dark and cool inside the rock, a temporary reprieve from the sun and the hunt. They emerged onto a high rocky ledge overlooking the valley, a natural fortress of stone. "We make our stand here," Samuel said, his face grim. He checked the action on his rifle, his movements economical and precise. He was no longer the quiet drifter. He was the soldier, the survivor. "Whatever happens," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "you stay down. Promise me, Clara." She wanted to argue, to tell him she would fight beside him, but she saw the look in his eyes. This was his battle to fight. "I promise," she whispered. They didn't have to wait long. Jacob and his men appeared at the mouth of the canyon below, spreading out like wolves cornering their prey. There were at least 8 of them. "Kane!" Jacob's voice echoed up to their perch. "It's over. Send the girl out, and we'll let you ride away. No one has to die today." "Miss Morgan is under my protection," Samuel shouted back, his voice ringing with authority. "Any man who tries to take her will answer to me." Jacob laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Protection? You've ruined her, dragged her name through the mud. What kind of protection is that?" "The lady made her choice," Samuel yelled. "Respect it and ride on." The first shot came from below, a puff of smoke followed by the whine of a bullet ricocheting off the rock near Samuel's head. The battle had begun. Samuel returned fire, not with anger, but with a cold, deadly efficiency. He was a master of this deadly art, moving from one piece of cover to another, making it seem as if there were multiple defenders on the ledge. The air filled with the roar of gunfire and the angry buzz of lead slicing through the air. Clara huddled behind a large boulder, her heart pounding in her chest, praying with every fiber of her being. Then she heard something, a scraping sound, not from below but from behind them. Someone was climbing the backside of the ledge, trying to flank them. She turned to warn Samuel, but he was pinned down, exchanging fire with the main group below. A face appeared over the rocks behind him. Tom Bradley, one of the town loafers who had joined Jacob's posse. He had a greasy grin on his face as he raised his pistol, aiming it squarely at Samuel's unsuspecting back. There was no time to think. Clara grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy, fist-sized rock, and threw it with all her might. The rock struck Bradley's gun hand. His pistol went flying, and he howled in pain and surprise. He lunged for her, his face a mask of fury. They grappled on the narrow ledge, a desperate, clumsy dance of survival. He was stronger, but she fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, clawing at his eyes, kicking at his shins. He backhanded her across the face, the blow sending stars exploding behind her eyes, but she held on, refusing to let him get to Samuel. Samuel heard the commotion and spun around. He saw Clara, saw the danger, and moved in a blur. The butt of his rifle came down hard on Bradley's temple, and the man crumpled to the ground in a heap. But that single moment of distraction was all it took. A shot rang out from below. Samuel cried out, a sharp, ragged sound, and spun around, clutching his shoulder. A dark stain was already spreading across his gray shirt. "Samuel!" Clara screamed, scrambling to his side. "I'm all right," he gritted out, but his face was pale, and his arm hung limp at his side. He was far from all right. He tried to raise his rifle, tried to get back into the fight, but the strength was gone. They were done for. The posse below, sensing a shift, began to advance. And that's when Clara Morgan, the quiet innkeeper's daughter, found a strength she never knew she possessed. "Enough!" She stood up, in full view of the men below, her voice ringing with a power that stopped them in their tracks. "Clara, no!" Samuel tried to pull her down, but she shook him off. "Jacob Miller!" she shouted, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. "You want to talk about honor? You want to talk about ruination? Where was your honor when you struck me at Willow Springs? Where was your honor when you threatened my family to try and force my hand? You are not here for justice. You are here because your pathetic pride couldn't handle the word no." The shooting stopped. In the sudden, ringing silence, every eye was on her. "I left of my own free will," she declared, her voice echoing across the canyon. "I chose this man. I chose him because he is a good man, an honorable man, who treats me like a person, not a possession. If that is ruination in your eyes, then I embrace it. I would rather be ruined with him than be a queen in your empty house. She could see the shock on Jacob's face, the shame warring with his rage. Her words had found their mark, striking him where he was most vulnerable. He had wanted to be her savior, her knight in shining armor. Instead, she had exposed him for what he was, a bully and a coward. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Finally, he seemed to shrink, the fight going out of him. "Mount up," he said to his men, his voice hoarse. "We're leaving." "But the reward," one of them started to protest. "I said we're done," Jacob roared, his voice cracking. He turned his horse and, without another look at the woman on the ledge, galloped away, his posse trailing behind him like a pack of beaten dogs. Clara watched them go, her body trembling with adrenaline. Then she turned to Samuel. He was slumped against the rock, his face gray with pain. He looked up at her, a faint, proud smile on his lips. "That," he whispered, "was magnificent and completely insane." "I learned from the best," she said, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him, tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the flow of blood. The battle was over. They had won. But as she looked at Samuel's pale face and the vast, unforgiving desert stretching out before them, she knew the war for their survival had just begun. The desert is a cruel and patient killer. It doesn't need guns or posses. It kills with heat, with thirst, with endless, empty miles. After the gunfight, Clara knew they were in a different kind of trouble, a slower but no less deadly kind. Samuel was weak from blood loss, and a fever was beginning to set in. Their horse was gone. Their water was almost out. They were alone. But as she looked at the man who had risked everything for her, a fierce, unyielding resolve settled in her heart. She would not let him die. She would not let their story end here. She got him to his feet, his good arm draped over her shoulders, and they began to walk. It was a desperate, stumbling journey through a landscape of rock and thorns. The sun beat down on them, and the heat rising from the ground was like the breath of a furnace. Samuel, delirious with fever, began to mutter, his mind back on the battlefields of the war, calling out names of men long dead. Clara kept talking to him, her voice a soothing, constant presence, telling him stories, reminding him of their plans for California, for the life they were going to build together. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she had to believe he could. By the second day, she was beginning to lose hope. Her own strength was failing. Her lips were cracked, her feet were bleeding, and every step was an act of sheer will. Samuel had collapsed, his breathing shallow, his skin burning to the touch. She knelt beside him, her tears leaving clean tracks in the dust on her face. This was it. This was the end. She had been a fool, and then she saw it. A shimmer on the horizon. Dust. It could be anyone. It could be Jacob, returned to finish the job. But at this point, she didn't care. Any end was better than this slow, lingering death. The dust cloud resolved into two riders. They were approaching slowly, cautiously. As they drew closer, she saw they were not from Jacob's posse. They were older men, their faces weathered like the land itself. The lead rider, a grizzled man with kind, tired eyes, pulled up his horse and stared down at them. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. "What in God's name happened to you two?" Clara looked up, her vision blurring. Samuel stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open. He squinted up at the rider. "Porter?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Jim Porter? Is that you?" The rider's face broke into a grin of pure, unadulterated shock. He swung down from his horse in a single fluid motion. "Sam Kane? I'll be damned. I thought you were a ghost." He knelt beside Samuel, his grin fading as he took in the wound, the fever. "Sam, what happened?" "Ambush," Samuel managed to say before his eyes rolled back in his head. Porter looked at Clara, his eyes full of questions. "Ma'am, I'm Jim Porter," he said, his voice gentle. "Sam here. He saved my boy's life at Antietam. I've been praying for a chance to repay that debt ever since." Clara broke down then, the last of her strength giving way to great, gulping sobs of relief. They were safe. They were saved. By a ghost from Samuel's past, a debt of honor come due in the middle of nowhere. The next few days were a blur of cool water, soft beds, and the gentle, competent care of Porter's wife, Rosa. Their trading post was a small adobe oasis, a haven of civilization in the vast wilderness. Rosa, a woman whose hands seemed to possess a magic healing touch, tended to Samuel's wound, brewing herbal remedies that fought the fever and soothed the pain. Clara never left his side. She held his hand, bathed his brow, and whispered to him while he slept. On the third day, his fever broke. He woke up, his eyes clear for the first time since the gunfight, and saw her sitting by his bed. "Hey now," he said, his voice weak but steady. "No crying. We made it." "You almost didn't," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "If Mr. Porter hadn't found us—" "But he did," Samuel said, his fingers tightening around hers. "That's all that matters." He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes full of a love so profound it took her breath away. "I need to ask you something, Clara. It might not be the right time or the right place, but I can't wait another minute." Her heart skipped a beat. "Clara Morgan," he said, his voice gaining strength with every word. "I have nothing to offer you but a wounded body, a haunted past, and an uncertain future. But if you'll have me, will you marry me? Not someday in California, but here, now, as soon as I can stand on my own 2 feet." The tears she had been holding back finally fell, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, leaning down to kiss his chapped lips. "Yes, Samuel Kane. I will marry you. I would marry you in a dust storm or a palace. The place doesn't matter. Only you." From the doorway, Jim Porter cleared his throat. "Well, that's convenient," he said with a wide grin, "because it just so happens there's a traveling preacher due to pass through here tomorrow. A little too fond of the bottle, maybe, but his knots are tied tight by God. He'd be honored to do the honors." And so, under the vast, indifferent desert sky, in a dusty adobe trading post, miles from anywhere, Clara Morgan became Clara Kane. Rosa loaned her a simple, clean white dress. Porter stood as Samuel's witness. The preacher smelled faintly of whiskey, but his words were heartfelt and true. They had no rings, no fine clothes, no feast. They had something better. They had each other. They had survived. As they said their vows, looking into each other's eyes, Clara knew she had made the right choice. This was not the life her parents had wanted for her. It was a life of risk, of hardship, of uncertainty. But it was a life of love, a life of freedom, a life that was truly, completely, gloriously her own. The price had been high, but as Samuel, leaning on a cane but standing tall, slipped his arm around her waist and kissed her, she knew with every fiber of her being that it had been worth it. She had found her home not in a place, but in a person, and their future, like the endless desert horizon, stretched out before them, full of danger. Yes, but also full of a brilliant, beautiful promise. 40 years. It felt like a lifetime, and it felt like the blink of an eye. The small town of Havens Rest, California, was nothing like Bitter Creek. The hills were green, the air smelled of the sea, and a person's worth was measured not by their family name, but by the work of their hands and the kindness in their heart. Clara Kane stood at the window of the small house she and Samuel had built with their own hands, watching the sun set over the valley. Her hair was silver now, and her face was a road map of a life well lived, a life of laughter and tears, of struggles and triumphs. It had been a good life, a hard life at times, but a good one. They had raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, all of them possessed of their father's quiet strength and their mother's fierce heart. They had built a home, a community, a legacy. A year had passed since Samuel had left her, slipping away peacefully in his sleep, his hand in hers until the very end. The whole town had mourned him, the quiet, respected man who had once served as their sheriff, who was known for his gentle way with horses and his unwavering love for his wife. But they had never known the whole story. They had never known the scarred, haunted soldier she had met by a creek so long ago. They had never known the man who woke from nightmares of a war he could never forget, who would hold her tight in the dark and whisper, "Am I a good man, Clara?" And she would always whisper back, "You are the best man I have ever known." Mama? Her daughter Sarah stood in the doorway, her face etched with concern. You've been standing there for an hour. Papa wouldn't want you to grieve so? Clara smiled, a soft, sad, beautiful smile. I'm not grieving, my love, she said, her voice a little thinner now, but still clear as a bell. I'm remembering. She told the story then, the one her children and grandchildren never tired of hearing, the story of the innkeeper's daughter and the mysterious stranger, the flight in the night, the chase through the desert, the gunfight on the ledge. She told it not as a tragedy, but as a legend, the founding myth of their family, a story about courage and choice, and a love that was stronger than fear. She took the small silver locket Samuel had given her, now worn smooth with age, from around her neck and pressed it into Sarah's hand. This was his mother's, she said. He would want you to have it. Tell your daughter the story someday. Tell her that love isn't always safe or sensible, but when it's real, it's the only thing worth fighting for. That night, as she lay in the bed they had shared for 4 decades, the room felt impossibly empty. She could still see him in his chair by the fire, reading, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. She could still hear his low, rumbling laugh. She closed her eyes and she was 20 years old again, standing by a creek as the sun went down. A man with storm-gray eyes looked up at her, and in that single moment, her entire world changed. It was a choice that had cost her everything she had ever known and given her everything she had ever wanted. A lifetime of love, a family she adored, and the quiet peace of a soul that had found its other half. No regrets, she whispered into the darkness. Not a single one. Out here in the West, they say the land remembers. They say that on certain nights, when the moon is just right and the wind whispers through the canyons, you can still hear the echoes of the past. The thunder of hoofbeats, the crack of a rifle, the desperate prayers of two young lovers on the run. The story of Clara and Samuel Kane became a legend in those parts. A cautionary tale for some, a story of hope for others. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous choice is the only one that can truly set you free, and that a love born in the dust and blood of the frontier can be the most powerful force on earth. If you enjoyed this story of love and survival in the Old West, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here, a campfire to share the tales that shape this wild and beautiful country. And I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of the world you're in. I read every single one, and it means the world to know where these stories are landing. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time with another tale from the untamed heart of the American West.